From presidents who shaped history to the ones who destroyed it, here are all the most memorable presidents explained in 10 minutes. Starting with George Washington, who basically had to invent the job from scratch. He could have taken way more power than he did. People genuinely wanted him to rule longer, even for life. Some even floated the idea of making him king. He shut all of that down. He believed the moment one man holds on to power too long, the whole experiment falls apart. One of the biggest moves he ever made was walking away. After 2 terms, he stepped down voluntarily. That one decision quietly told future presidents, this isn't yours forever. If Washington hadn't chosen limits over ego, the presidency might have turned into something very different very fast. Washington pushed the country forward, but Jackson was the guy who kicked down the doors. The man was pure chaos. He had a temper you didn't want to test. He fought duels, literally carried scars from them, and somehow turned that raw anger into political power. He became a populist before anyone even had that word in mind. Unlike many of the US presidents who just survived history, Jackson survived bullets. In 1835, someone tried to assassinate him. 2 pistols, both misfired. Fortunate for Jackson, but extremely unfortunate for the shooter. He charged at the guy and started beating him with his cane. That was a classic Jackson portrayal. Reckless, fearless, and impossible to ignore. He made the presidency feel dangerous again. The man left a mark you couldn't erase, just like the one he carried on his face for life. Then came Lincoln, right when the country was being ripped apart by the Civil War. Most so-called strategists would have cracked under that pressure, but Lincoln ended up making the boldest move of all. He ended slavery, and he carried the weight of the war and the moral stakes like no one else could. He knew the risks, yet he didn't back down. In the end, he paid the ultimate price. He was shot dead. After someone like Lincoln, you'd think the presidency had already seen peak intensity, but Theodore Roosevelt somehow turns the stakes even higher. Roosevelt was fearless in a way that didn't feel performative. It was just who he was. Sickly kid growing up, asthma, weak body. Doctors said he wouldn't last long. He took that personally and rebuilt himself into a force of nature. As president, he went after massive corporations when no one else dared, broke up monopolies, took on railroad giants, and made it clear that power, government, or corporate wasn't above the people. And would you believe it if I told you that the same man who loved war and rough living also protected nature like his life depended on it? He set aside millions of acres of land, created national parks, forests, and monuments, and basically saved huge parts of America from being swallowed by industry. If energy were currency, he'd still be the richest president the country's ever had. After Theodore Roosevelt's non-stop energy, Woodrow Wilson felt quieter before his presidency took one of the strangest turns in American history. After World War I, Wilson pushed the idea of a League of Nations to stop future wars before they started. In 1919, Wilson suffered a massive stroke, and the public barely knew how bad it was. He was left partially paralyzed, mentally affected, and unable to do the job the way a president should. Power didn't disappear, though. It shifted. His wife, Edith Wilson, quietly stepped in. She controlled access, filtered decisions, and essentially decided what reached him and what didn't. The title remained with Woodrow, but the real authority was transferred to his wife. For months, maybe longer, the United States was being run by someone no one voted for. Wilson's presidency faded into silence, secrecy, and one of the most unsettling moments in U.S. history. After Wilson's presidency quietly slipped, Franklin D. Roosevelt took power when the country was completely on its knees. The economy was shrinking. The Great Depression reshaped what Americans expected from their government, and Roosevelt leaned into that hard. New programs, bold experiments, constant communication. With his fireside speeches, he reassured everyone who trusted him even once. He made people feel like someone was finally in control. Then came World War II, and somehow Roosevelt became the central figure holding the Allied world together. Strategy, diplomacy, pressure flowed through him. No president, before or after, has held that much influence for that long. 4 elections, 4 terms. The country was so overwhelmed by Franklin's power that they eventually said, "Never again," and capped future presidents at 2 terms. Confined to a wheelchair, leading through voice and force of will alone, Franklin reshaped the presidency into something massive. By the time John F. Kennedy comes in, the presidency suddenly looks young again. After years of war leaders and hard decisions, JFK felt like a reset. But behind the glamour, the pressure was unreal. The Cold War was at its peak, and one wrong move could end everything. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a major highlight. For 13 days, the world was basically holding its breath while Kennedy stared down the Soviet Union. Kennedy didn't panic where many would have. Instead, he maintained composure and made controlled decisions that pulled the planet back from a potential nuclear war. He spoke in a way people remembered. He made politics feel aspirational, especially to younger Americans. There was a sense that the future actually mattered again. And then it ended. A motorcade, a gunshot that took the president's life. Kennedy's presidency was brief, but the shock of his assassination turned him into a moment America never really moved past. Nixon came in smart, strategic, and deeply suspicious of everyone. He opened relations with China, cooled tensions with the Soviet Union, and actually ended U.S. involvement in Vietnam. On paper, that's a strong presidency. Then Watergate blew it all up. The break-in was bad. The cover-up was worse. Secret tapes leaked. The more Nixon tried to control the narrative, the more trapped he became. When he talked, paranoia took over. Eventually, the evidence was too much. Facing impeachment, Nixon resigned, the only president in history to do so. He shattered public trust. After Nixon, Americans never looked at the presidency the same way again. Clinton came in young, sharp, and unbelievably comfortable on camera. The economy took off under him. Jobs up, budget balanced, tech booming. On paper, things were great. Personally, though, total chaos. The Monica Lewinsky scandal dominated everything. Clinton was charged with misconduct. He lost the legal battle but somehow survived politically. Approval ratings were still high. That was Clinton's paradox. Strong economy, constant scandal. He could explain policy in detail, then undo it all with one bad decision. His presidency reminded us that in politics, personal mistakes don't stay personal for long. Then came Trump, and everything changed. The presidency stopped sounding presidential and started sounding like a fight. Every day, every platform. He didn't come from politics, and he never pretended to. That was the appeal. To supporters, he was finally someone punching back at elites, media, and institutions they didn't trust. To critics, he was chaos in human form, breaking norms just by waking up. His presidency was and still is a non-stop controversy. Twitter announcements instead of press briefings, constant clashes with the press, 2 impeachments, immigration battles, trade wars, and an approach to power that felt more personal than institutional. The office remains the same on paper, but people in the office change. And that's the part worth remembering. The presidency isn't a title. It's a mirror reflecting the person standing in it.